podcast episode for Torizon and an interesting topic, CRA. So we have our guest today. It's John from Toradex. And John, could you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, happy to. Thanks for inviting me here, Melvin. Nice to speak to you again. I am Toradex's principal product security architect with focus on Torizon. So my area of responsibility includes designing how we build cybersecurity into Toradex products in general, but Torizon OS and Torizon Cloud in particular. Mm-hmm. And I've been with Toradex for about 5 years now, but before that I worked in automotive cybersecurity, and I have a lot of experience dealing also with industrial and medical, which I know are some of BE.services areas as well.
Thanks for the great introduction, and I'm more than excited to start discussing the topics of CRA with you. So last year I got a beautiful opportunity to listen to one of your presentations at BE.services event. So now I'm more than excited to touch base on the topic. So it's been more than a year and there are a lot of updates with CRA, and it has been a buzzword in all the trade fairs, and this is what people are expecting. So to start with, could you please explain about basics of CRA, because everybody are not completely aware of it. So could you please explain us in simple words for our audience?
Absolutely. So the CRA refers to the European Union's Cyber Resilience Act, which was passed a couple of years ago. It's a broad new set of consumer and industrial product cybersecurity legislation. And under the CRA, anybody who is putting any kind of digital product on the marketplace, and we can get a little bit later into what counts as a digital product, but anybody who wants access to the European market now has to conform to these new cybersecurity requirements that the CRA added in. And it's a pretty comprehensive piece of legislation. It has certainly a lot of complexities, a lot of things to think about. But I think the biggest way to introduce it, or the best way to introduce it, is by explaining that it is, first of all, a risk-based system. So the idea of the CRA is to get companies to take cybersecurity seriously over the course of product development. You want security integrated into your product from the beginning. It's not a product you can buy. It's not a layer you can add on at the end. It's something that you have to do continuously. And then it goes a little bit beyond what some similar cybersecurity legislation has done in the past, because it also gives a list of some very concrete functional requirements that digital products have to have. And that includes things like software updatability, integrity protection, and a whole host of other specific concrete requirements.
Yeah. So these requirements, right? So I have this question from a lot of people. Hey, Melvin, CRA is cool. We can get to understand that it's security, but it does not concern me because my device does not connect to the internet. So do you think CRA need not worry about it?
One of the biggest myths about the CRA, and I do hear it all the time. It's that you only have to worry about, well, first of all, that you only have to worry about cybersecurity as a principle if the device connects to the internet, but also that you only have to worry about the CRA if you have an internet-connected device. No, the CRA is very specific and very broad about what products are covered. So the language, I'm probably going to slightly paraphrase, but I think I'm going to be pretty accurate because I know I've said this at least 100 times over the years. It applies to any device that has any digital connection to any other device, either logical or physical. So what does that mean? If your device has a USB port, that is a physical connection to another device. If your device communicates via Bluetooth Low Energy, that is a digital connection to a digital logical connection to another device. It is not just for devices that have internet access. And in fact, some of the examples of critical products are products that typically wouldn't be internet connected. It's very clear that the CRA applies to basically any product that has any kind of a processor or microcontroller.
Exactly. Yeah. So even having a JTAG exposed, even this should be considered as a potential attack, right? So people.
Absolutely, and interestingly, that's one of the specific pieces of guidance that the CRA talks about. I mentioned those functional requirements. One of them is to limit or protect the limit, authenticate, or protect any debug interfaces to the device, and so JTAG would be included in that. I think probably some of your customers, perhaps in the medical field, have maybe been through this with the FDA's new cybersecurity rules that came in about 4 years ago now. I've certainly seen it with some Toradex customers, some Torizon customers. The FDA has started to get really stringent about any physical port on the device. You know, when you do your submission, you have to submit photos of the device. And I had one customer that got themselves into a bit of a sticky situation because the final version of their device it had a secure enclosure and had a metal plate over some interface ports that included an Ethernet port.
Okay.
And the design of the product didn't make use of the Ethernet port, but they were using a relatively stock carrier board design, so there was still an Ethernet port present. The plan for the finished product was to physically secure it behind a metal plate held in place with security screws, and the casing had a security mechanism. This is sort of a common measure in medical, right? They accidentally submitted a photo of a development device in their FDA submission, and that photo included the Ethernet port, and they ended up getting stuck in a long recertification process. Yeah. Because as soon as the inspectors at the FDA saw that, they were like, "Oh, Ethernet port. I need to know, why is this port here? What security controls do you have on it? What happens if a network cable is plugged into this?" All of this detail that they weren't quite prepared for because they never intended to use it.
Understood. Yeah. So I could understand that as a basic, CRA wants to give us set of guidelines, so they are not against the the companies, but they want to help the companies to be more secure. And there are so many things that we need to follow to make sure that the security patches are done, and our hardware design is right, the software design is right, and there are many things involved here. So this would obviously, this regulation is trying to protect against something, right? So what is the economic background behind this? So what is the magnitude of these threats that we are seeing in the current world?
So cybersecurity is, in my opinion, a classic example of something that should be a good target for quality, focused, reasonable, and limited government regulation. It's an area where there are a lot of negative externalities. If you put an insecure product on the market, especially an insecure internet-connected product, and you put it out there, don't bother delivering security updates, and a vulnerability is discovered a few years after it launches. Let's say it's something like an internet router. Or a consumer device that can then be taken over. It can then be used by criminal organizations as part of a botnet, for example. Yeah. So cybersecurity flaws don't just affect the people who buy and own the product. They affect the cybersecurity landscape of the internet as a whole. And where it's not the internet, it can be, in industrial contexts, one component that has a serious security flaw can be leveraged into elevated access throughout the rest of the air-gapped network. And you asked for an example. One of my favorites, this is very widely known, but bears repeating anyhow. Quite famously, there was a casino in Las Vegas that had their internal network compromised and quite a lot of employee access stolen, that most likely led to some financial loss, although it was never made public exactly how much. Because there was an IoT aquarium pump in one of the aquarium displays that didn't support appropriate security modes and ended up being the entry point for hackers to get in. And it ended up on the the facilities side of the network, was used as a base, and then as a vector to attack the rest of the network. So that's the motivation of the CRA.
Yeah, exactly. So even at the scenarios where there is an air gap, right? So air gap is also not going to protect, and it is always prone to an attack. So it doesn't mean that even if you have security for 99 of your devices, if your 100th device is compromised, then that's where you can have an backdoor to your entire network, right? So
that's true. And this is well. Let's talk about what it means to for the CRA to be a risk-based approach to regulation. There's no such thing as perfect cybersecurity.
Yeah.
In every case, you can have something that is perfectly locked down the way locked down like Fort Knox, and some crazy new attack research comes out of the blue that nobody ever thought of. Examples in recent years include the Spectre class of attacks on microprocessor architecture, branch prediction, the Rowhammer attacks, which are electrical attacks that can be triggered by software that flip bits in memory. You can never be absolutely secure. What you can do is integrate secure processes in your development process so that you mitigate the risks. And this is what the CRA really asks people to do. It asks you, when you're developing your product, to take some kind of formalized approach to enumerating the risks that your device might be exposed to, and then analyze the severity of those risks and implement appropriate mitigating measures for the risks. And you talked about air gapping. So air gapping is not a perfect solution, but what air gapping is a mitigation.
Exactly.
So when you are looking at these, the CRA essential requirements, and you know that your device is going to be in an air gap network, first of all, you can take some precautions for this on the software side, but also you can list that in your risk assessment. You can say, this is my device. It has a network port, but is designed to be installed by an experienced industrial system integrator who should be responsible for maintaining the security of the network.
Yep.
And then you can declare that you find some of that risk acceptable. Now, all these have to be reasonable. And if this sounds familiar to especially industrial customers who might have experience with IEC 62443 compliance, specifically Part 4.1 and 4.2. Sorry, I know I shouldn't reel off numbers in interviews like this, but nonetheless, I think most people know at least a little bit about 62443. The CRA has really a lot in common with 4.1 and 4.2, especially with this risk-based process.
Exactly.
So if you've gone through that kind of product development process with IEC 62443, the CRA is not gonna look too unfamiliar to you.
Understood. So what, in a simple terms, if a man is hungry, there's a saying that you don't give him a fish, you teach him to fish. So it's just like not just making it secure once, but you cannot be completely secure, but you need process that even if your system is prone to attacks, you should have a mechanism to make sure that always, the hacker world also progresses with us. There are new ways to do it, but we cannot anticipate all the new ways. I think we should have a mechanism or a framework to make sure that when there is a anticipated risk that is there, then we should have a way to mitigate it. So, John,
That's
I would
exactly
say,
right.
even for me, I'm an embedded systems engineer, and I also understand the network protocols a lot. But all these steps, right? It looks pretty complicated to me, and it took a long time to research to understand what it really takes. But what if a company, right? Imagine a company just creates sensors that they want to do, or they want to create a machine, but they don't have all the security mechanisms. But how they can get into the CRA compliance by using Torizon. So, what are the steps that is done by Torizon to abstract this complexity layer to the customers who want to comply to that? Could you please explain me that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Torizon is an industrial Linux operating system and platform. So we have
Yeah.
Torizon OS and Torizon Cloud. Torizon OS is designed from the ground up to make security compliance, especially in industrial environments, easier. One thing that we see a lot at Toradex that maybe a lot of people who don't work in the embedded industry aren't necessarily so aware of, there are so many small to medium-sized companies making great products out there, but they know their domain. They're scientists who are experts in, I don't know, doing materials measurements. They are biologists who have an interesting new field analysis device. They are biomedical researchers who are making a new medical device. They aren't necessarily, companies full of huge teams of embedded developers. So we built Torizon OS to make industrial embedded Linux security easier and industrial embedded Linux development easier. So one of the core ideas in Torizon OS is, first of all, you always have to have a software updater out of the
Exactly.
box. I'll circle back to that in just a moment. But then also we provide an infrastructure for doing your application development in containers and deploying your application in containers. And this has both ease of use benefits and it can act as a security boundary in your
Yeah.
device.
So it's
That's one of many, of course, but I think that's maybe two things that we could dive into a little bit deeper.
Yeah, exactly. So, what I'm able to understand is that instead of having to your applications running on a system that is not known, so Torizon gives you the platform and the pieces for you to start developing, and all your middleware, all the complexities of over-the-air update and containerizations, Docker-based environments, and also the underlying hardware is provided so that these companies need not be CRA experts or cybersecurity experts, but they just need to care about the value that they need to deliver, but not worry about the vulnerabilities that the OS has. Is it ready for the over-the-air updates? Should I maintain this over-the-air update mechanism to put the patches on the net on the field devices that are already deployed in thousands or millions maybe? So this is how I'm able to see that how these companies who come to us for Torizon related services, we see that they want to capitalize on this and move the complexity directly to you guys and make sure that they are spending all their R&D resources on making their sensor the best sensor in the world, or making their medical device the best medical device that they could cater. So this is a value chain that I'm able to clearly understand, because I'm not worried, because this sounds really not my thing. And but if there is a company who we can depend on, so offloading the expertise to Torizon OS really gives a lot of value to the customers.
Absolutely. And I think maybe a good way to understand it, and I'll just throw up on the screen here
Sure.
a little system architecture diagram. Yeah, so that is a responsibility that we take really seriously, of course. And also it's something that we had been developing as the essential concept for Torizon OS for many years before the CRA was being developed. And it just so happens that our vision actually aligns really well with the way that the CRA expects manufacturers to operate. So if it's all right with you, I'd like to just pull up a little diagram here, and I'll put this on the screen. This is the general architecture diagram for the MITRE Embed framework, which is a risk analysis and modeling framework from the MITRE Corporation, which is probably widely known to many people from the terms, their very well-known CVE database, and Stride as a framework for threat modeling, and various other security-related public goods. MITRE Embed is a framework for understanding and dealing with cybersecurity threats in embedded devices. And the way that they organize it, as you can see from this diagram here, they ask you to identify and enumerate the properties your device has, and then it's a framework for mapping those to potential threats. And the thing that I want to point to is the way that MITRE breaks down the architecture. It puts it into application software, system software, hardware, and networking. And as an embedded developer, you do have to take into account all of those things. But what Torizon tries to do is make it as easy as possible to keep your focus on the things that matter. So we provide and cover that whole system software area with Torizon OS. We, of course, as Toradex, we take a lot of the hardware burden. So everything around your SoC and the various core components that come on our module is already taken care of for you.
So, John,
And then,
this rings a bell to me. Sorry to interrupt. So, is it like you are reducing the bill of materials of the software to Torizon OS and just the application? Did I understand it right?
So that's another important part of it. Yeah. So Torizon, one thing we do is we release a software bill of materials that covers the complete Torizon base system.
Yeah.
And we regularly monitor for vulnerabilities and keep that updated. We even do vulnerability analysis for you so that you can know whether you actually have to worry about a system vulnerability or not. But we keep all of that system software component tightly contained and taken care of for you. And that it makes your life a heck of a lot easier, because if there's a vulnerability in the base system and you've got an embedded device that maybe is built as a traditional embedded Linux with build root, with Yocto, and it just boots up into your application, everything is on the same rootfs, a compromise at the application layer can lead to a compromise at the system layer.
Exactly.
That's exactly the kind of things that the CRA worries about.
So it's
With
like,
Torizon,
in the ships, they containerize it. So even if one part of the ship breaks, the water does not flow through all the compartments, right? So it's like...
That's a great analogy, yeah. So you can do your application development and have it be containerized, and then you have an extra layer of protection around your application. And that has practical security benefits, of course. This is what I care deeply about as somebody who has worked with supply chain security and cybersecurity for years and years. But concretely, if this is something you need to sell to your manager, why you should implement something like this, it reduces your compliance and regulatory risk as well, because the more boundary lines you can draw, the more contained you can keep it, the easier it is to go through your risk assessment and say, maybe this risk is not super high. So you can run your application as a set of containers. Even we see this architecture all the time, and I know you guys have employed it as well.
Exact same one. Yeah, exactly. So we can see that since we have made these into containers, even our customers. So Coligo is a product which does edge AI. And customers are always wants more and more features, and much worse than that, which we really hate, is customer wants to put his piece of software inside Coligo. So for this, once we allow this, there is a vulnerability that even our software gets compromised. But since we are based on Torizon OS, it gives us this flexibility to even add this customer layer. So we ask them that, is it containerized? Does it running with Torizon OS? And we also, sometimes it comes in a different way. We make sure that we move it into this particular framework that is already provided, and then we find it, okay, this can be pretty secure because we are not going to worry about the underlying components because they have not changed because it's being taken care by you guys, right?
Yeah, and I think you also probably see when you're doing that integration the benefit of declarative resource allocation within Docker, right? We don't just, I mean, I've seen approaches to doing containers on embedded where it's essentially just for compatibility purposes because somebody wants to ship wants to ship their whole Ubuntu machine to the field. But what Docker and the underlying technology, C groups and namespaces in the Linux kernel, allows you to do is give a containerized application access to only the specific concrete hardware resources it needs. And that can be things like sensors, but it can also be paths in the file system. It can be network ports. And the real advantage that I see, and this is why we kind of chose this point on the container orchestration spectrum with Torizon, we use Docker Compose. We want it to be simple. We want you to be able to see in your Docker Compose file exactly how the application stack is running and configured, and be able to change it declaratively when you need it. It makes reasoning about the security of your application a lot easier.
Yeah, great. So so we have discussed about so many concepts, and I'm really we can also continue to discuss more things, but I quickly want to check as Torizon anticipated any kind of these risks already, and you have provided these patches and your customers have found value to it. Can you give me a use case about this one?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's challenging about developing system software is that we can't always predict every single use case that our customers will have. We saw recently. Let's see, this was about 6 months ago now. There was a critical bug in the Linux sudo utility. For people who are unfamiliar, this is a console utility. When you need to run a program with higher privileges than your current user, you run it with sudo.
So maybe for Windows user, it is run as administration option, like sudo can equal to run as an administrator. Yeah?
Yeah, exactly. So this is something that, first of all, for a lot of the time, it wouldn't matter in an embedded Linux context. You might have taken another security measure. You might not have any kind of terminal access. But you always want to be cognizant of the risk that somebody attacks some other part of the system and gets some privilege escalation. And then maybe they get a terminal and they're able to run sudo. And this vulnerability, quite unfortunately, allowed any user who could run sudo, no matter if it was completely unprivileged, they could immediately elevate to root. It was an attack with very limited precursors there. Now, we were already protected against this in a couple of ways. Of course, in Torizon OS by default has our secure remote access service, so you don't have a remote shell that people are generally expected to use. But what we were able to do is very, very soon after the vulnerability was known, we were able to patch it, do a point release of the release versions of Torizon that were affected by that, do some extensive compatibility testing, which we have big old board farms at Toradex. Every Torizon OS release goes through extensive automated testing. And we were able to get a patch out for that in just a couple of days, notify our customers, and anybody who is using Torizon gets a strong, secure software update system built in from the start. So they were able to just deploy that and not have to worry about, how many recipes in my Yocto build do I have to update to get this? Yeah, exactly. Is it going to break my application? No, your application is running in the container. Yeah, we're fixing something at the system level, and you can do those things independently.
Yeah, John, this sounds really great. Like you guys found a vulnerability, fixed it, and you shipped it with over-the-air update mechanism. So all of this is done in your pipeline where the identification happens and the mitigation happens, just like we started with our conversation. So we are already 30 minutes into this podcast, and I know we can talk for days together with you. And I have so many more questions to talk about, which I don't want to continue in this